for anyone who has not been to Creative Mornings before, Creative Mornings is an international breakfast speaker series. Every month there is a global theme, and every individual city chapter finds a local creative speaker to talk on that theme. So right now there's 238 chapters around the world, and one of them is here in Charlottesville, Virginia. As a little bit of history, when we were started about 5 years ago, we were the smallest city to be allowed to have a Creative Mornings. Since then, they've expanded. I think other people have stolen that title from us, but I'm still gonna hold on to it a little bit. And yeah, like I mentioned, there's a theme every month, and this month's theme is pattern. Thank you all to our local partners who allow all this to happen and pay for the coffee and the pastries. So UVA Arts, New City Arts, and the Freeland Museum of Art. So a couple things to shout out. So for anyone who comes regularly or just is engaged in the arts and community, you probably know Emma Terry. She is normally the one who welcomes everyone every month. She couldn't make it today, but if you would like to see Emma, she has an art opening next Thursday at City Clay. She's gotten into making these amazing seascapes out of clay, and these urchins and jellyfish. I think it's been like less than a year that she's been making all of this. So she's having her first opening of her clay work at City Clay next Thursday. So go check it out. And is anyone here from the Freeland? Okay, I will read this to you. But so the Freeland Museum of Art at UVA is having events through the summer. There is an exhibition at the Little Museum of Art, which if you haven't been, is a very tiny, this big gallery they have out front. There are meditative tours happening. There are tours of the Aboriginal art exhibition they have that Creative Mornings got a tour of in February, and Chandua Goldman is hosting an event in July. So if you can get to the QR code from where you're seated, that's available, or just Google the Freeland events for more info. And a huge thank you to VMDO for hosting us today in their beautiful space. And so I want to invite up Dr. Thacker to tell us a little bit about VMDO.
Welcome everyone. We're so glad to share our downtown space with everybody. And we're not strangers to Creative Morning, but it's been some time. So it was fun to bump into Jeremy and rekindle this fun collaboration. So I hope you come back. We're VMDO. We're an architect of 80 folks, both in Charlottesville and in Washington, D.C. And we're committed to people, not just our people. One in the room is Lauren Shoemate, but our community. What it looks like for our staff is some continuing ed and traveling fellowship and really interesting work. Check out our website for that. But we're also really committed to our people, all of our people here in Charlottesville, and some of the work that we're doing. Humble brag about our work at the Kindness Cafe. I just love the organization at the YMCA. Go get your cup of coffee. Second of all, we're committed to education. VMDO was founded by a professor and his students. That was 2.5 generations ago, but we do work in educational typologies. In K-12, we're working with Buford Middle School, Serena, I see you. We've touched a lot of the work in the city of Charlottesville and Elmore County, but we also do a lot of high performance K-12 work. We do a body of work in higher education. Lauren herself is working at the University of Virginia on the Center for the Arts and the Contemplative Commons. But we've also branched into community work. We feel that's important to our mission. So we are touching preschools and community centers. Brooks YMCA is one of the many projects that we do. Our Design Thursdays are as energetic as this gathering, where we try to share some of our design thinking that happens across our work. We're committed to innovation. we try to use VR strategies and lean into research. Charlottesville's a great place to just really think outside of our box to advance our own work. We're committed to wellness, not just here in our office and our staff, but we're doing a lot of health and wellness initiatives with our clients. Contemplative Commons at the University of Virginia is one. Old Dominion University really is looking to support their first-gen learners with their mental health challenges at the University of Richmond, destigmatizing mental health and really teaching into wellness strategies. Didn't know it was animated, sorry y'all. Charlottesville's a complicated place. We sit in the epicenter. This building is complicated as it relates, and we really want to take these seriously. We were the first firm to sign on to the JUST certification. What the JUST certification is, it's a third party that really holds firms accountable to really look critically about best practices within their firm, whether that's transparency or employee benefits. And so we go through the scorecard. What that looked like for us is some micro changes in our leadership and decision making. Also, our Director of Sustainability and Inclusion, Michelle Ant, led our firm through some bias training. We are not putting ourselves on a pedestal, but just joining the hard conversations that we need to really bridge the gaps of the generation of our leaders. We put our purpose over our profits. We are not deep-pocketed. I think that you can talk about our pay spreads, but most importantly, we want to put our dollars where it matters. So again, humble brag to our leadership, but all of us that want to make Charlottesville and our work a better place. We want to know that we are all in for and committed to a sustainable future. I think this is one of the pinnacle missions of the firm to really work on high performance. We're addressing carbon, EUI performance. We can bore you to death of what our energy consumptions are, but really looking to renewable practices. And we're committed to Creative Mornings. Please come back. With that.
And a few more thanks to Ian and to Corbin for the photography and videography work. And thank you to the Creative Mornings organizing team for helping me out as always. Corey for checking us in and bringing over the pastries today. Emma, even though she wasn't here, printed out the name tags on Wednesday and left them in my mailbox. Lovely. If anyone ever wants to help volunteer, you can email us and let us know. And finally, Creative Mornings likes it for us to read the Creative Mornings manifesto to start off the event every month. Would anyone like to volunteer to read the manifesto? I also have it on a piece of paper.
Manifesto. Everyone is creative. A creative life requires bravery and action, honesty and hard work. We are here to support you, celebrate with you, and encourage you to make the things you love. We believe in the power of community. We believe in giving a damn. We believe in face-to-face connections, in learning from others, in hugs and high fives. We bring together people who are driven by passion and purpose, confident that they will inspire one another and inspire change in neighborhoods and cities around the world. Everyone is welcome.
Thank you.
Okay, and finally, I'm going to introduce So MaKshya Tolbert is a poet, wood-firing potter, and land steward who recently made her way back to Virginia where her grandmother raised her. She is based in Charlottesville, where she writes about shade. She is the 2024 New City Arts Guest Curator, the Fralin Museum of Art Writer's Eye Fellow, and serves as the chair of the Charlottesville Tree Commission. MaKshya was a 2022-2023 Lead to Life Curatorial Fellow and New City Arts 2022 to 2023 Research Residency Artist in Residence, which culminated in her first solo poetry installation, Shade is a Place, which you can kind of see in the background here. She has received a creative and scholarly fellowship support as a Fulbright Scholar, as well as from Community of Writers, Tin House, and Roots, Wounds, Words. Her recent writing is featured in Emergence Magazine, Art Papers, Gastronomica, Cake Zine, Odd Apples, and Queer Poem a Day. She has work forthcoming from the Kenyon Review, Nightboat Books, and Campfire Stories Volume 3. She holds degrees from the University of Virginia, University of Gastronomic Sciences, and Stanford University. MaKshya spent the last decade providing funding, facilitation, technical assistance, and capacity building towards livable, community-controlled food systems. In her free time, she is elsewhere, where Eddie Esbrough Jr. calls that physical or metaphorical place that affords the space to breathe.
Thank you. Okay. Good morning. Good morning. Can you guys hear me okay? Does this feel too messy? Okay. I wanted to briefly just plug the Fralin and share that I know every year for the Writer's Eye contest that I am part of curating this year, the adult competition always gets the least applications and is always the least exciting part to work on. And the young people are really brilliant. So just curious about people who are curious about my work and might also be curious about other things that I also appreciate and would be curious to submit some writing. Okay. I'm really happy to be here. This is the first time that I've talked about Shade as a Place, having taken a step back, having graduated, and talking about this work at ease, which is a totally different position than the way that I began the work. If you know me, you know that. So I'm going to talk a little bit about some of the patterns that I got to let go of, some of the patterns that I got to embrace, and we will pace ourselves with some poems, and I will try to set us a little bit on the downtown mall that's behind us. And if anyone feels a need for a material portal, this is a piece of willow oak wood that came off of the downtown mall in January 2023. Relationships were broken so that I could have this. Okay. So a couple of the things, you can see Cosmo? You can see it? Okay. A couple of the things that I intend toward today, I really want to share Shade as a Place and other entanglements and talk about some of the projects, literary or otherwise, that this work is opening up. I would love to attend to the downtown mall together and just think about what is it like to both look and wait for something to happen there, and then reflect a bit on my patterns and see what curiosity there is among us to join me in one shape or another. Okay. So Shade as a Place and other entanglements has sort of become the way that I talk about my projects. On the one hand, it is the title of my first full-length poetry manuscript, which is also my MFA thesis. On the other hand, it's kind of become the bucket that I use to talk about the curiosity I have around Black ecological attention and placemaking in Charlottesville. It's also a trio of books that I'm working on, of which Shade as a Place is the entry point. And we'll close with talking about the sort of scandalous vines that I am mostly a part of right now. It's also the way that I've gotten to talk about a real commitment and investment in the material culture and stakes of living in a town that is in some ways a forest, in some ways a city, and it's also just where our lives are, and thinking about what is the capacity for shade that is mutual, for shade that is equitable, and how can my work be just a bucket where all of that gets to happen. And mostly this project is just my life. I don't know, I've managed to really fold so much of what I care about and so many of my relationships into this place that is called Shade as a Place. And if you saw me last year on the mall, this was more or less the uniform for some of the walks that some of us took. Okay, we're gonna start with a poem, and this poem will sort of throw us right into the way that I'm thinking about patterns, and in particular, patterns of practice. Ways to measure trees, basic assessment. All my life, I was a hammer. I struck at everything I touched. Then I commit a few Thursdays to trees. I am not gentle, but I could be. Around one tree, I try my basic circling steps, tapping the tree's bark with my mallet and listening for the difference. Alive, dead, alive, still alive. I muscle the clay and learn the same lesson again and again. Could be family trees or literal trees. I hear the precarious things. I phone my forester asking about sounding trees, about my ears, how I want to know a few trees but don't understand what I hear. All my life I swung the wrong things. I put down mallet and muscle, circle the trees' girdling roots and ask, where does it hurt? The forester returns my calls. He's glad he caught me this evening. He heard what I asked about trees and ears. It's subtle, takes practice. So, just, move around a bit in my new pants. I felt like this poem, which in my manuscript is right in the middle of the project, was an opportunity to sort of acknowledge that for as much of the serial loss and thinking about some of the Black ecologists who have offered some of that language, for as many episodic losses as there are, losing a sense of place, losing my appetite, losing people that I loved, that there's also something to be said for what it's like at that pace to also practice awe and watch the awe begin to interrupt some of that grief and some of that placelessness. And so I think that for me, Ways to Measure Trees is really an opportunity to, watch the evidence change and start to see some practices of attention begin to take the place of practices of duress. So much of my work has been about wanting a sense of place in Charlottesville and not knowing where to start, and trying to imagine, how do I narrow or clarify this scale and find a place where I can actually put my attention. I don't drive and I am picky, and so I really only spend time in a walking radius of where I live. And so that might be why on some level I was so drawn to a place that is 4-ish blocks from where I live. And so I'm hoping that we can maybe think about the urban forest as a concept, not just the city, but really think about the mall as a kind of forest for a moment, even if it's only for the next 20 minutes. Social forestry is one of the ways that I think about my work and think about the kind of attention that I have toward both relationships and ecology and trees as communities, and also as standalone beings that also are in relationship to their different parts. And so if we think about a forest as a set of relationships, and a forest is an intertwined set of relationships anchored on tall, woody perennials, stacked from deep roots to leafy crowns with layers of ecology. Save all the parts, we do not know how to assemble one from scratch. Trunks, branches, and even leaves. And so for me, I'm thinking about a forest with this kind of relational intimacy and wondering, how can I also think about the downtown mall as a forest that takes on some of that intimacy, both in the literal sense, woody perennials, some of the stacking, some of the layers, but also beyond that, save all the parts, that I have to believe that the more I began walking back and forth and trying to figure out what was there for me, that I would get a sense of what the parts were to begin with. So I start on the mall on the East End, but even prior to there being a place to walk and a project that I call Shade is a Place, there's me deciding to come to Charlottesville. This poem is maybe one way that I will share what that transition was like. And this poem is called Eastbound. At the end of their life, The trees, they tell me, do not stay where you thin. Can I speak about thinning? As a child, I wrote these poems I called A Plant Called Hope. I loved sick plants and wanted more for them. I loved my mother and wanted more for her. I lost the small book, then lost my grandmother, then lost her house, then almost lost my mother. Believe me when I say plants and people find their way. This time, I am eastbound. A stranger has the grace to ask me, are you ready to come back to Virginia? I stopped believing in California. It hurts too much. Tell me to have my easterly shoes on. Tell me east will have me back if I move softly. I put on my transition shoes, find a place of rest in the middle of things. Ask me again if I'm ready to come back to Virginia. This time, ask me in front of the trees. This is the place that I start in the book, and also the place that I start on the mall, which is to be east and come back and accept all of the serial losses, all of the frustration, and all of the movement, and then try to move again, but at a different pace and with a couple different questions. Maybe it's also fair to say that it took me writing a whole manuscript to realize that I had tried this before and that I had been like a really interesting kid. Writing about like blight in the language that I had, you know, for what was happening to the few plants I saw and to my mother. And really thinking that it was coming back here for the MFA program, having spent, you know, the last several years working in sovereignty spaces and thinking about relationships and thinking about unmet need and being so fixated in some ways on the unmet needs of other people and myself, first other people, and then being asked by Rita Dove when I was coming to UVA if I was ready. And I thought that was such a wild question to ask a person who you don't know that I wanted to see, you know, and as she said, I wanted to come on faith. And so I took my despair and tried to walk with it a bit, looking for cues, looking for clues, looking for my appetite. And I had these ongoing questions, many that were anchored in the downtown mall's architectural history, sort of watching myself start to walk. And aimless as I was and frustrated as I was, kind of just yielding over to whatever the movement or the geometry or the possibility was on the mall itself. And beginning to see that so much of that was actually designed and opened up in some ways exactly for somebody as curious as I was. It's funny because I'm not a dancer or an architect or a choreographer, but I really have so much respect for both of the Halprins, Anna and Lawrence, and yeah, just what they knew about their bodies that I am sort of learning about mine. And I begin to generate these questions around shade study and wanting to know in a sort of somewhat elemental sense, like what is shade, what are its properties, what does it do, who is it for, and then little by little, how much does it cost and why is it propertied, and in different words, like what happened. So these are some of the ways that I try to, on paper and in relationship, try to feel around, not really for a sense of place, but really for a sense of a place to start. And was grateful to have with New City Arts, you know, a long-term residency that was for that kind of curiosity and literally so that I could listen and hear myself and get available. This is also my first PowerPoint that I've ever liked. And I actually tweeted at PowerPoint that I love PowerPoint, and they wrote back and said, "We love you too." I asked for a new license and they didn't respond. I took some of the questions, which were admittedly hard, and tried to find a method that could hold them. When I think about method, I'm thinking about primarily Saidiya Hartman and her theorizing on method, and also thinking about the etymology of method as a path, a road, a track, a direction. So there was something sort of wayfinding about method that I was drawn to. And I found that there were a couple of patterns, mainly of practice, that I was able to actually put my full attention to. I think especially because I spent the last few years struggling on a very physical level with attention, to both figure out, is there something that I am curious enough about to try and take care so that I can be there? And also, is there a pace that I can do it at every day that will keep me here? So I'll share a couple of the things that I got to do with my hands. I joined the Tree Commission pretty quickly into my shade study. I will say, a couple years ago, I wanted to study shade. This was a place to do it, and I think it's so funny for those of us who know what it means to have intimate curiosity and then to go into administration. So this is sort of the best way that I can navigate on a very real level that there is so much anchoring in a set of priorities and anxieties and like such an interesting entanglement that people are choosing to be a part of. And I guess maybe the choice was always a thing that I was drawn to. I joined the Tree Commission in 2022. I had spent some time going to city council meetings. They were painful. And someone said, you should go to the Tree Commission because they like each other. And when I was back in my city clay days, and I went, and I just kept going, and eventually they were like, who are you? And that they were on Zoom. Folks had just seen me on the Zoom, probably asking questions in the chat. I ended up writing something that I will read briefly that sort of sets up the kind of anxiety and curiosity that I had about being a more formal part of the city and also not being from here and being so new. Shade is a place in urgent need. I take up listening. It takes a long time, the rearranging. You could say this city is a tree, an open center penetrated by light. You could say shade is my refuge, this compass of what matters. Tell me how to pace myself toward comfort. The Tree Commission appoints me out of an urgent need for shade. We mourn our introductions and push out our state of the forest. 10% canopy decline in 14 years. Every neighborhood declines. The city tree is becoming a heat island. Redlining stays anti-environmental. Still, some neighborhoods heat different. We map out who will walk what trees. The truth, nobody in 10th and Page knows my name. I really don't even know what to say, but that I was grateful that right away I trusted my anxieties about how do you do this? How do you be here? And when you're this curious and this eager, like what is the pace at which you get to know where you are? Do you go on other people's walks? I thought about, I think my first prolific walk, I was like, okay, here we go. We're gonna get out there and be with people. And so many patterns got in the way of that. Not just my pattern, so many historical patterns got in the way of that. But it was important to me, as a writer to be able to admit that and be okay with that. And now to start watching my projects move off the mall a bit, which we will briefly hit on at the end. But the Tree Commission really has been a place where I got to ask people what is needed, what is going on, what is hard, what is scandalous, and they told me. And then I wanted something that could quiet me down and not be so hard and not so entangled. I also am the chair now, so I am feeling like I did both the thing I wanted to do and also some of the things that I don't want to do, you know, which is get so deep in the entanglement that there's not the space for quietude. But then having a kind of slower writing process was there the whole time. Black compositional thought is the way that one of my favorite artists, Turquoise Dyson, talks about her drawing practice, her architectural, environmental, infrastructural drawing practice. And so much of that gave me a frame for thinking about my own work. How do I blueprint and archive and share what it's like to be where I am? And as the projects took place in the mall, so for example, the city decides we're gonna move the most stressed 9 trees and fell them and mill their wood, you know, needing a process for how to attend to that, how to show up quite literally. And so I sort of thought about to myself, you know, I wanted practice losing trees, and there was a sort of imminent pattern of anticipating what's coming. And I suppose the patterning of watching in the canopy on the mall, all of their stresses being the same after a couple of years of walks, just looking at what is it like when trees at the end of their life that are also simultaneously shading a place, what does that look like? And so first with my writing, really having to just figure out what I was looking at. This is a little collage I made of some of the projects and quotes and people and places where the Tree Commission has most directly been involved. And so, you know, whether it was looking at the patterns of all of this repair wood, wound wood on the mall, do you all know or recognize these wounds? I wasn't gonna do all of that, but some of them are from like heat lamps on the mall. And I don't wanna derail, so I'm just gonna leave that there. But I was thinking about, honestly, the anxiety that was coming up around losing trees, whether it was Parks and Rec, whether it was the Tree Commission, really just trying to anticipate what was coming. And I was just so curious about, there has to be a way to anticipate what's coming that isn't antagonistic. And I had some hunches about how gentle and in integrity the felling would be anyway. So it was interesting to try to find a way to put myself literally just on the mall. And so, you know, what I did more or less was, for the 10 days that trees were coming down, I told my students whatever they needed to hear, so that they didn't expect me. And I basically just hung out on the mall and took like very sad notes about what was happening, and would, like, you know, ask folks here and there, do you need that stump? Or, you know, find different ways to be there, and just was a witness. And then I spent some time just trying to quiet down and looking through like what just happened, who was there, what are the tools, what is the mode, who else is curious? You know, there was a day where I noticed that I think in like 4 hours, one other person asked the folks working what they were doing. So I just sort of tried to find ways, like, how do I render what's happening? How do I render the care? And how do I try to close the gap between what's here and what's coming, given that there was so much nervousness, honestly, on the commission, myself included, about what, in many ways, like what you all would think, and if you all would have your needs met or still feel like there was a space where you could spend time. And I think especially because I had been so drawn to not only the architectural history, but the social history that precedes the mall even being built, you know. I guess I was just so curious about, is there a way that I can try to be attentive enough and present enough here that it feels like I belong, you know? And do I want that? I wasn't really sure if I wanted to be, for lack of a better term, like the one Black person that feels welcome on the downtown mall, you know? And so some of that was not only the way that I thought about, like, what does a Black sense of place look like in a place that really, really was built for leisure, for comfort, for shopping, but not mine per se. And I realized that the best way to think through that was to literally stage something social, and try to stage these more intimate tree walks that I could take people on. Shade walks were last summer's project with New City Arts as my real anchor and home for this season. And folks would meet at the east end of the downtown mall, and we would just make our way slowly westward, sometimes in the shade, sometimes in the sun. I leave that to the adults and sometimes children who came on the walks. But I really wanted to practice seeing if I could be that kind of invitation and see would folks listen to me? I don't know, was one of the curiosities that I had. And so these were the constraints, basically. 2 mornings a week, we walk along the shade if you want to. And the walks were westward. And we kind of walked our way through the architectural history of the mall, the current entanglement politics, where are the chairs, of the mall, and got to just do that with each other. And I really relied on a lot of what my walkers shared about their lives here, whether they had been here for 3 days, basically like me, or 30 years. And I found that so often, for as much of my own shade study as I had, it was actually really taking home what somebody else said and thinking about that, and maybe having to reach back out to them. And those were some of the places where I saw my own work, creative work, just actually digest and actually turn. Someone said to me once that it felt like, to the degree that Main Street used to be an old mannequin footpath, before it was a paved 2-way road and before it was a pedestrian mall. A man said it's like they're putting the trees back on the road. And I thought that was really precious. And then also Maureen's not here, but from New City Arts, but one time Nelson saying, I only want to walk in the shade today, And also asking, where is MaKshya today? And so, I don't know, I think I was just so moved by the way that other people embodied the walks. And the observer in me was like, this is actually what I think the work wants to be about, is maybe watching relief happen, watching people be together, or taking care of people. My friend fainted and we needed to take care of that. I'm thinking about sort of what some of the tree work ahead is, and this is one of the photos from the week that we spent felling those trees with Big O, which the city contracts out to do some of the work. But I shared that this first book project really has been about shade and relief and a Black sense of place. Some of that is my creative work. Some of that is trying to figure out, how can I get air conditioners to people? How can I be a part of tree planting in ways that are really not in the purview or the scope or the curiosity of the city? To the degree that it is in their purview, how can I also be gentle bossy when it comes to that stuff too? Right now, a lot of what I'm curious and excited about have been sort of these Ravenna repairing corridor restoration projects, and really thinking about all of the plants that have been deemed invasive and unwanted. And again, trying to think about what are these terms of management that matter to us? How do we talk about them? And as usual, how to do something for me that is a bit sneaky, but also really sincere at its center. And so I sort of figured, when suspicious, join them, and have been part of these forest assessments on the Ravenna, mostly curious about, maybe there is something to be said that the words are the words, but that the intimacy and the love of vines and trees and plants and canopy is there. And thought that maybe if I could show up and walk with people, on their terms. I'm the novice in the crew, so I just pretend that I don't know things until it's time to do something differently. But thinking about, maybe it's possible that taking these slow walks that are in some ways even slower than the walks that I was doing on the downtown mall. And my shade walks were maybe I will feel around for exactly how much common integrity and common care we have, and then together maybe we will find different words, or I just might have to invite you all to have different words. And just thinking about, on a very real level, what are all of the parts, save all of the parts, thinking about that Forrest quote, and what is my role? You know, do the words matter? Are they as important as the literal relationship that we all have to English Ivy? So that's what I'm up to these days. And then over the next couple of years, I've been working a bit on a very quiet level with like wildland fire and prescribed burning. And so the hope is that my third book project would be about really anticipating fire in Virginia. I think a lot of us don't have to even really anticipate it. It's here. And especially as things get hotter and drier, I think about coming from the Bay Area and trying to leave the fires and feeling like I didn't have the intimacy or the need to stay. And then getting here and watching the fire start up too. And I just don't know how to outrun anything. But there's something about fire in a kind of generative transition, and I'm drawn to fire and also to plants that do germinate through fire, you know. And I think serotinous plants, the idea that they are also those plants that come late, and there's something about trying to figure out how to welcome fire in some ways as we navigate like any stage of capitalism that you want to call this, and just thinking about how to transition our ecologies. So that's what I will be doing on and off in Virginia and in Oregon for the next 2.5 years. But primarily, I feel like the work that's ahead of me is literally just cycling through everything I just shared over and over again, and continuing to watch the trees on the mall do what they are going to do over the next several years, with the collaboration of honestly like hundreds of people who care a lot about not just the trees, but about how to adapt generously, whether that's architect firms, whether that's the Tree Commission, whether that is me just putting myself in the center of all of that. But I think that at its center, what has been most important to me are the pattern of my relationships, and then watching the work play out one thing after another, that it was only by getting so close to shade trees that I even recognized there were vines choking the trees, you know, and having to get so curious about the oaks, whether it's the white oaks that are maybe on their way out or the willow oaks on the mall. And the more I got into the oaks, being like, oh, they have fire regimes. They have all of these different adaptations over years and years to a kind of comfort and familiarity with fire. But I only got there because I kept just showing up and repeating something that only sounds clear and in dignity right now. But that really for 3 years has just looked, well, y'all have seen me around, you know, some of you know how it's looked. So in the book, Tree Work Ahead, I think those are the first literal words of the book. And I think it's exciting that in large part, as I'm closing here, they are also the same 3 words. I think they're just apt. And this is the poem I'm gonna end on. Before I end though, I just wanna say thank you. I don't feel nervous at all right now. So that's huge. And it means a lot to me to see people curious about something that has just opened me up so much, and to watch that every time I want to do something, Shade is a Place involved on the downtown mall for like the obvious reason of just like, this is where I live now. There's always a space or an institution that is open to feeding me, walking with me, hosting people that want to get hosted who have nothing to do with my project. And I'm really grateful for the people that love me or just think I'm cool and make the work possible. So thank you, Kendall, and everyone else. Satisfiable. just before does anyone else want to read this? What? Okay, was that you? Okay, it's the wrong one for inactivity. So I will end with this, and it's exciting for me that.
I will totally read your poem. I think
Really?
it's beautiful.
I would love
But
that.
I also feel like, what does it mean to have the author and the poets? Poets tend to read their work best. I can do my best, but I think I should read it and then you should read it.
Okay, deal.
You ready?
Or you can even popcorn me and just stop at some point, and I'll.
No.
Okay, great.
Wait. I'm reading it and then it'll be your turn. I didn't have your coffee. Ready? Summer takes insistent life. I eye one final tree of heaven, an open-hearted lean. I rehearse sounding its life. The mall winds down. A little bark, let's go. I shed down to quiet, a quality of standing still, except the cathedral of trees warding over my life. Like trees, I wear time on my body. Shade undresses the dress. Ambivalence courses through water, sliding along tunnels. Time shows me what I never noticed. Bricks strung, no mortar, 2 ways off the mall. Both roads branch by. I stopped trying so hard. At last, I take to my body. Ooh. Okay, your turn.
Satisfiable. Summer takes insistent life. I eye one final tree of heaven, an open-hearted lean. I rehearse sounding its life. The mall winds down, a little bark lets go. I shed down to quiet, a quality of standing still, except the cathedral of trees warding over my life. Like trees, I wear time on my body. Shade undresses the duress. Ambivalence courses through, water sliding along runnels. Time shows me what I never noticed. Bricks strung, no mortar, 2 ways off the mall. Both roads branch by. I stop trying so hard. At last, I take to my body. Thank you. Jeremy, what time is it?
It is 9:48.
Okay,
We have
awesome.
time for a few questions, if anyone has questions for MaKshya. Lisa has a question for MaKshya.
Please.
How great did I do reading your poem? On a scale of 1 to 10.
I loved it.
I think I'm a 10. I was going to say. That was my question. My question was, can you talk a little bit about the differences as you see them between method and medium? Because what I feel when I saw the subtitle for the book, when you say relief is my form, it feels like that's also an answer to that question. So can you just meditate, walk a little bit us through, I'll follow with you about the Hartman. I'm like, was that Venus in 2 Backs? Which Hartman is that? But I'll ask you later about that. But method versus medium. Can you just play with that a little bit for us?
Yeah. You know, I spent the most time thinking about that when I was at New City Arts. I was writing the poems and trying to work at the Center for the Book, letterpressing the poems, which, you know, had just sort of started touching type for the first time. And I guess there's writing, then there's letterpressing, and then there are the pots that I was coiling. And I noticed that the pottery that I was doing, which was, you know, Shade is a Place, same project, and the writing that I was doing, like the questions were different. The mediums were different. You know, one of them, like clay, really quieted me down in a way that poetry is so overstimulating for me. I've noticed that the mediums bring out such different parts of me. I wonder if the method is a place where I get to be a bit more myself, whatever it is. Like there were these questions I had that I took with me into the wood firing. those same questions I took with me onto my shade walks. And in terms of being, like, you can't really tell today, but kind of a uniform person, this is what we're wearing. These are the questions. This is the site. This is the direction. There are parts of the work that I'm learning, what did my advisor call me? Procedural, you know? And I think what I do with my hands changes, and like my relationships felt like they were really hard in the poetry world and in the clay world. The mediums were different, but I really feel like the method is the inner life of the mediums. Like, I'm kind of just vibing and thinking about in this moment what comes up with your question, but I don't know, the method feels like some of the dignity, some of that inner life that I get to apply to not even just poetry or pottery or like teaching, you know, with my students, but even to the Tree Commission, like what it's like to show up there with you know, MaKshya has a kind of curiosity, a kind of method. Does it fit in that space? You know, sometimes. And I think to your point, which we can talk about later, you know, Saidiya Hartman, in thinking about just the intimacy of a method, and that there's something between like what is a method and what is a life. And I think that's why I like so much this idea of a method as being a road. A Black feminist idea of method really gave me a bit more structure and rigor in some ways that when I was still at UVA, you know, I was struggling because there was a method that I was invited into, and it was interesting and kind of impressive, but it wasn't responding to any of the loneliness. And so, yeah, even the methods, I guess, are pretty entangled.
Yes, no, that's beautiful.
Okay, I think that's okay.
Thank you.
Okay.
That's a great answer. Thank you.
And you know I wanted to be in your class for years. So I was always hoping to literally do that together.
MaKshya, this was incredible. Thank you so much. I'm really struck by how, both in the way that you express to us and the way that we get to see and feel, how your like living is infused into the work. And the question I have, I hope is not antagonistic, but I am thinking
Ooh.
about how you think about the places that are not shade.
Yeah.
How you name them, what they look like, what it feels like. And then as you were reading Satisfiable, I wonder if duress is part of that place. And there was another point earlier where you brought up, I think, duress versus attention or intention. So I think I kind of want to fill in. I love this idea of shade as a place. And I'm like, so in what ways is shade as a place distinct, or set of places distinct from the places that shade, the places that are not shade?
Sometimes when I think about shade as a place, what comes to mind is not arriving to a shaded place, but is sort of the navigational work of making a place. And there's something about like, how do I not just be underneath the shade but feel a sense of place? Sometimes I'm in places that are not shaded, feeling like I'm in shade as a place. Sometimes I'm in parts of Rose Hill that have no trees, but have a kind of intimacy or set of folks who wanted to walk with me. And we are doing so much of the place-making work, even though when we're looking around, like, there aren't trees yet. Other times, and because this is just like part of what you're talking about or asking about, I think, is not about antagonism, but like there's something just so painful and overwhelming about the equity, the gap. Sometimes I'm in places that are incredibly shaded and I feel like I'm nowhere. So I guess on some level there's like literal shade, and then there's this way of being at ease, even if only for a moment. And I noticed that, like, even on the downtown mall, maybe I'll get both of those all at once. But I think that what is coming up most for me right now is that what does it mean to both make shade. And I primarily operate in trees, as you all now know, but then there are these spaces that literally don't have the parcel size or the space to accommodate large shade trees, and thinking about like, is there something beyond shade? Because I think I'm pretty literal, you know, like I'm not talking about other shades, I'm really like talking about arboreal shade. But sometimes I'm thinking shade, and then if that tree shade doesn't anchor us in a kind of condition for relief, what else can we make here? I feel like some of the mutual shade work, I call it, that I've been trying to do that really is goes beyond trees and is thinking about like, what does this work look like in the spaces where shade is either not possible or like folks just refuse to invest. Is anything that I'm saying getting at parts of what you're curious about?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I'm really thinking about the place making
Yeah.
aspect. And there's literal shade and there's ways of being at ease even for a moment, and that sometimes they overlap, but
Yeah.
needn't. And that feels super generative.
Yeah. And then being kind of curious about where is there space to really insist and intend on the arboreal shade and also on this kind of gathering and kind of just way of being with each other. I think I'm not in it yet, but when I think about some of the land trust work that I'm curious about, where folks are working with parcels and working with designing what can this space look like, I think especially given that 80% of trees in Charlottesville are on private property, now that I know exactly how little tree space the city is actually responsible for or in charge of, sometimes I'm like, oh, well then why am I sitting here? If I actually need to be on some level believing that property matters, and just figuring out how can I be at the pace of people who I think like the honor of being asked to help manage someone's land, because it's really intimate space to be invited into facing the shadelessness. There's something about even being in Fifeville or being in Rosen Hill and being like, there's something so intimate about even acknowledging the lack of shade. I won't lie to you, people seem to love the work, but I mostly don't have people that I think about this stuff with, you know? I have folks that I celebrate it with and who are like, what's that cute thing you're doing? But often, like day to day, I'm kind of just like really out in the streets thinking about all of these different pieces. So I'll be curious to see, you know, what it's like, because already the questions I get, like I said, maybe this is why I began the walking, because I was like, now I get to make people help me.
So we're about at time, but I guess final question for you is, everyone's about to like leave basically onto downtown. Do you have any suggestions or thoughts? What should everyone do?
The first couple walks I took on the mall on purpose, the forester Stephen Gaines, said, nobody really looks up anymore. And I was like, who are you? And I began doing it more with him. And I think there's something actually really sweet about taking a look at some of the stresses and also thinking about this conversation and being like, I really think things will be okay. So maybe just one invitation is to just look up and get a sense of the patterns. A lot of these trees are like shooting up lots of leaves and shade, but also signs that they are at the end of their lives. So maybe two things to look at would be like trees where the leaves don't reach the edge of a limb, you know, or don't reach all the way out. Nutrients aren't making their way up, and just noticing like which trees seem to be extending, you know, outstretched enough, and which trees have a bunch of bare stems and bare roots. And then, I don't know, that feels like plenty. I don't want to overwhelm you, but those are the patterns of stress that I was talking about. And, you know, I think what excites me about folks taking a look who want to is that at some point the city will publicize, you know, what their plans are. And I didn't understand what I was writing when I was writing it, but so much will change, you know, and I think it'll mean a lot that there are some archives of what we've had and what we've been able to make and do. And maybe a few more of us will have a sense of what some of those things to look for are as we make that transition. It's like group chaplaincy a little bit.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
And thank you all for coming.